Good afternoon, Professor. Our presentation is on the poet Gwendolyn Brooks. Our group members are myself, Alina, Namat, Jessica, and Natalie. Starting with the biographical background, Gwendolyn was born June 7, 1917, and she sadly passed away December 3rd in 2000s. Gwendolyn was born in Kansas, and she later moved to Chicago with her family, and she spent the rest of her life there. Brooks was encouraged by her mother and father to start writing at a very young age. Her first poem was published to a children's magazine at the age of 13. She later accomplished many great things in her career. She won prizes such as the Pulitzer Prize in 1950 and was one of the first African American women to do so. Brooks also graduated from Wilson's Junior College in 1936. Continuing the biographical background, Brooks is engaged in major social issues, including war and peace, racial justice, and the plight of women. Brooks' commitment to social issues is often disguised by her modernist use of persona. For example, Brooks' sonnet Gay Chaps at the Bar from her first publication, A Street in Bronzeville, is an exploration of America's unequal treatment of the black soldiers during World War II. Her unusual ballads on the death of Emmett Till in her third volume, The Bean Eaters, offer protest subject matter in an innovative narrative form. Her gallery of female portraits, from Haiti Scott to the crazy woman who sings in November, stress varieties of heroism and anti-heroism and women's responses to difficulties they confront. She was influenced by and wrote about what she saw and heard in the street. In Brooks' workplace is tied to identity and alienation. It blends with memory, fantasy, and fact, creating a foundation for tension and support. The narrative voice meditates these forces, forming community between readers and text. In the Sunday of Satan Legs, Smith Satan Legs' journey to Chicago symbolizes self-creation, reflecting experience of black men moving from the South to the northern ghettos. One thing that Gwendolyn is known best for is the fact that almost all her work, if not all of it, is based off what she's seen in the people of Chicago. The poem by Gwendolyn Brooks that we've decided to analyze and break down is Boy Breaking Glass, whose broken window is a cry of art, success that winks aware as elegance, is a treasonable faith, is raw, is sonic, is old-eyed premier, our beautiful flaw and terrible ornament, our barbarous and metal little man. I shall create, if not a note, a whole, if not an overture, a discretion, full of pepper and light, and salt and night and cargoes. Don't go down the plank if you see there's no extension. Each to his grief, each to his loneliness, and fidgety revenge. Nobody knew where I was, and now I'm no longer there. The only sanity is a cup of tea, the music and the mirrors. Each one other is having different weather. It was you. It was you who threw away my name, and this is everything I have for me. Who is not Congress, lobster, love, Lua, the Regency Room, the Statue of Liberty, runs. A sloppy amalgamation, a mistake, a cliff, a heim, a snare, and an exceeding sun. This poem, commissioned for a magazine by Mark Crawford, is about the cry of despair for many young male Black Americans who have found themselves unable to advance themselves in life. The boy's act of vandalism is also art in a sense because it's means of expression. The poem Boy Breaking Glass by Gwendolyn Brooks represents a vivid, complex portrait of artistic expression, societal neglect, and the search for identity within the confines of an indifferent or even hostile environment. This poem delves into the theme of creation as a form of resistance and assertion of self. Through a broken window, a metaphor for disruption and a cry of art, the poem explains the dynamics of visibility, recognition, and the struggles for meaning in a world that often overlooks or marginalizes certain voices. After reading the poem, it's evident that he is using his art as a form of release of his anger, hurt, and other emotions. For being in an unfair society where he feels he cannot advance and or the opportunities to advance are not set up in his favor. In the poem by Gwendolyn Brooks, she writes, it was you who threw away my name. It misses everything I have for me. She expresses that his art is the only thing that he has to show for himself, and that this is what's most important to him through his life of hardship and inequality.
We were asked to break down the poem into different groups and categories, starting with situation and setting. For situation, the situation centers on a neglected boy expressing his frustration and anger by breaking glass. This action shows his need to be heard in a society that neglects him. The poem highlights themes of social neglect and inequality. The other category includes setting. Breaking Glass by Gwendolyn Brooks takes place in an urban area, specifically a neglected or more poor community. This community is likely left without plenty of opportunity and represents the realistic of a mundane neighborhood. While the physical area is not described, it can be inferred the physical area represents the ways in which the boy feels as if the society is a constraint to him.
Secondly, for our analyzation of the poem, we have word choice and order. Word choice and order play a very big role in poems because it can take you to a very different perspective of how people see things and people understand things in a poem. One of the biggest things I've learned about poetry in the past is that we will never truly understand what that writer wanted us to understand from the poetry. And the best thing that we could do is analyze the words like we're doing right now. So, word choice and order both do play a very big role in poetry. For word choice, we put Gwendolyn Brooks uses of sharp, intense words, cause a sense of urgency and intensity in the reader. Examples including shatter, smash, and cry, which not only relate to the physical action of breaking something, but also overall elaborate on the theme of breaking social inequality and norms. For order, we have the poem uses disorder and chaos to invoke frustration in the reader. The disorder represents the mental struggles of feeling overwhelmed and frustrated with the social injustice, while also elaborating on the boy's constant desire to be seen and heard. This tension between the desire for change and disorder of the boy's mind, which reflect in the poem, showcase the internal battle between chaos and control.
Continuing our analysis on the boy breaking glass, we're on to theme and tone. Theme is very important when it comes to poetry as it provides focus and meaning. It helps the reader understand what the poem is about at a deeper level, just beyond the surface of imagery and narrative. It also helps to create connections as a strong theme invites readers to reflect on their own lives. Following, tone is also very important and substantial to poetry as it sets the emotional atmosphere. As if you read a poem with more emotion, it adds more value. It also adds depth to the poem. Tying along with theme, it also reinforces the theme. For theme centers on societal neglect and the challenges faced by marginalized youth. The boy's act of breaking glass is portrayed as a desperate cry for attention and a way to express himself in a world that ignores him. For example, the line, I shall create, if not a note, a whole, highlights his need to make an impact, even if it's through destruction. It emphasizes the consequences of society's inequality and the boy's frustration in trying to be heard. The tone is both empathetic and critical. It conveys the boy's frustration while also criticizing the society that ignores him and drives him to break glass. For example, the line, I shall create, if not a note, a whole, illustrates his need to make an impact through his destruction, highlighting both his emotional state and societal neglect that he faces.
Moving on to imagery and figurative language. Imagery is important in poetry because it helps bring the poem to life, and makes it easier for the reader to understand. For imagery, we wrote the act of breaking glass symbolizes the voice rotation. For example, the line, I shall create, if not a note, a whole, shows imagery and captures the impact of the boy's actions of breaking glass, emphasizing his need to be heard and make an important impact in the world. For figurative language, we have metaphor, whose broken window is a cry of art, compares a broken window to a form of art capturing the boy's act of breaking glass as a way of being seen and heard. Following metaphor, we have imagery. When Brooks mentions the action of breaking glass, it paints a picture of the anger the boy felt and leads to a better understanding of the poem.
Thank you for listening to our presentation. While we're wrapping up, we wanted to include the reasons why we decided to choose Gwendolyn Brooks. Gwendolyn was a very powerful woman that did many great things, so much so that Chicago to this day still honors and celebrates her every year on June 7th by having a poetry reading. Winning the Pulitzer Prize is to this day a substantial accomplishment. Gwendolyn being the first African American woman to receive the award is something that cannot be forgotten. All her poems have purpose to shine a light on the African American community of Chicago. Again, thank you for listening to our presentation. Below, we have listed all of our works cited, including all of our credible sources and our scholarly sources that were used throughout the presentation, including where we received the poem The Boy Breaking Glass from.